Now getting to the meat of things, what are the challenges for actually developing resilience? Now we have the concepts and the steps needed to operationalize resilience. Operationalizing the resilience of human environment systems is important for any attempts to develop resilience. However, it's also important to grasp the challenges for such endeavors. This section focuses on presenting a variety of such challenges, including cognitive biases and limitations, social constraints, technical and environmental limitations, and administrative, political, legal, and economic constraints. We talked a lot about this in adaptation, and we'll talk about this in sustaining the commons as well. Cognitive challenges, this is a very fascinating topic. As I said, we'll just take a brief run through these. Human beings have a number of cognitive biases that predispose us to preserve status quo and to avoid spending resources on reducing the risk of potential deviations away from our preferred expected scenario that are outside our direct realm of personal experience. So when somebody says something is going to happen in the future and you need to spend money to protect against that, very few people can connect to that, because there is something called discounting. We always think a dollar today is worth more than $2 next year, or $10 in 10 years, and so on. So those are very standard evolutionary biases. On the most basic level, human beings are biologically inclined to react to what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. In other words, the more tangible the risk is, the easier it is to get a reaction. Seeing is believing is what we always say. However, the more we are exposed to something, the more familiar it gets, and the more we tend to develop a preference for it. This is referred to as the familiarity principle, or mere exposure effect. In addition to being a pillar for marketing and advertising, it has implications for how human beings perceive risk. This is tightly connected to the tendency of human beings to be biased by their affective feelings when making judgments and decisions, referred to as affect heuristics. That's a kind of affect is a psychological thing, and heuristics is how you construct things in your mind of possibilities. For example, a person who lives right next to the railroad going into Jakarta in Indonesia is very likely to be aware of the risk of stepping too far out of her front door and onto the track. However, being born and raised there and experiencing several trains thundering past every day, is likely to gradually reduce her aversion to the trains. So when you newly move there, you may get very sensitized to the fact that train comes and it is uncomfortably close, but once you live there for a while, you get used to the idea, and you may become almost immune to the idea of the danger that's right outside. Perhaps even to the extent of preferring to stay there if presented with a less familiar but safer alternative, at least until an accident occurs in our vicinity and another fundamental cognitive bias kicks in. So it's how human mind works. So this is not just a joke. Look at this. This happens a lot in Mumbai as well. Houses next to the railroad in Jakarta, Indonesia, you can see just how close they are. People are just going on about their lives, and sometimes these tend to go fairly fast. So if you even tip over or reach your hand out, you may get hit fairly badly. As indicated earlier in this chapter, human beings are fundamentally biased by recent experiences. It's called recency. We are, in other words, inclined to view the future as an extrapolation of the present. This is referred to as availability heuristics, and may have worked well earlier in history when our world was less connected and fluid. So everything was within your realm of walking or connecting somehow, and now you have things happening very far away where you may never go. It still has obvious and they may still affect you, right? It still has obvious benefits in relation to events with quick and direct feedback, such as having a careless neighbor being hit by a train, but it is also a central obstacle for resilience in our increasingly complex and dynamic world. Our future is no longer an extrapolation of our past, if ever, but full potential scenarios that are ignored if we base our anticipation on recent experiences. Did I read it correctly? Our future is no longer an extrapolation of our past, if ever, but full of potential scenarios that are ignored if we base our anticipation on recent experiences. We should definitely do everything we can to learn from our experience, but be aware that such limited sample is not likely to represent all possible future events, particularly since human beings are inclined to believe that this is the case. It's not yesterday we need to adapt to, it is tomorrow. So we are always influenced by what happened yesterday, and we want to think that may happen again tomorrow, and we want to get ready for it, but what happened yesterday may be very different than what is about to happen tomorrow. Our tendency to learn by focusing on short-term feedback also restricts learning to what has actually happened, largely ignoring what almost happened. Near misses and close calls may play some role in some instances, but history is full of obvious examples of the opposite. For instance, the more or less complete inactivity after Hurricane Ivan just missed New Orleans in 2004, even after the mayor rather clear-sightedly had pointed out a number of major challenges that caught the city by surprise when Hurricane Katrina hit a year later, which was a really tragic event which is not completely allowed the city to come back to its pre-Katrina state so far, almost 15 years later. Well, almost 20 years later actually. However, the near misses and close calls are not only ignored, they are directly undermining resilience by allowing the focus on short-term feedback for learning to signal whatever precautionary measures taken as unnecessary. Frequent false alarms of a mid-1990s dormitory fire alarm at the University of British Columbia resulted in my friends living there ignoring it and jamming it with a towel to make it possible to stay inside without too much nuisance. So people get used to fire alarms going off, and 3 times out of 4 it may be just a false alarm, but 4th time may turn out to be deadly. And if you jam the alarm, then you're going to be criminally liable and expose yourself to danger. Similarly, recurrent cyclone warnings and evacuations, which turn out in hindsight to be unnecessary, undermine their own effectiveness over time. But this is a matter of improving the cyclone predictions as well as keeping people aware of the uncertainties in the predictions and the need to take action even if they feel that it's always going to be wrong. This focus on short-term feedback is, in other words, creating a cyclical pattern of strict compliance to precautionary measures in events following a major event, incrementally eroding for every time the measures turn out to be unnecessary until the next major event proves them vital again. So here is hurricane evacuation route for information tuned to radio. All the information is given. Hurricane evacuation route sign in Tulane Avenue, Midtown New Orleans, with lines left by long-standing floodwater after Hurricane Katrina. So here is a line that is, 4 feet high, that was created by the flooding due to Hurricane Katrina. This is a long section, so should I keep going? Let me read one more. Our tendency to learn by focusing on short-term feedback is not only undermining compliance to immediate precautionary measures such as evacuation, it's also undermining our will to invest in proactive measures to reduce risk more generally, as the more effective these measures are, the more infrequent the events become, therefore eroding the experience needed for measures in the first place. So you see how complicated this is. Let's say you did make an investment for the future, and then that makes you very safe against the same hazard. Then you become even more immune to the hazards. Of course, there is the idea of investing for the future, where you may not benefit depending on the time scale for which the investment is being made. So even though it may be your own offspring that is going to benefit, you discount the investment, saying, if I invest 100 today, it's only going to be $10 tomorrow, so I don't want to invest so much money. So discounting works in both ways. Give me $10 now rather than $100 next year, and I don't want to invest $100 now because it'll be worth only $10 next year. This is also connected to a discounting effect that makes human beings prefer immediate over long-term rewards, more specifically a tendency to discount the value of uncertain future benefits of proactive measurements compared to certain immediate cost of implementing them. Upfront cost becomes the biggest factor. This uncertainty leads often to procrastination, in which decisions are delayed due to the fallacy that time will provide more certainty. Wait and see is the most dangerous attitude, because rational ignorance is involved there as well. It won't. That's the kind of mantra used. In terms of time providing more certainty, it just doesn't. The survival of our world as we know it depends on proactive thinking, which by definition is liable to uncertainty, regardless of how long we wait. Prospect theory is also helping to explain such procrastination, showing that human beings tend to be more averse to risk when choosing among potential gains than between potential losses. So if you find suddenly $5, you will be happy, but if you lose $10, you're going to be much sadder than you were happy when you found $5. So prospect, what is this called? Let me see. We know it depends on prospect theories. Should be simple to remember. Prospect theory says how we bet against potential wins versus potential losses. Gambling that we talked about before we defined risk. Consequently, human beings tend to gamble more when anticipating negative outcomes, which is unfavorable for the future of our planet, as the prospect of making seemingly infringing changes in lifestyles causes many to do nothing in hope that things will not be that bad after all. So you are just refusing to invest in the future, as opposed to calling it betting on the future with uncertain risks. Okay, so let me read one more paragraph and then we'll stop. This procrastination of implementing proactive measures to reduce the risk of deviations away from our preferred expected development trajectory is worsened by other cognitive biases. Human beings tend to have positive illusions about our abilities and control over events and our future itself, as well as to believe others to be more at risk than ourselves. These are very intuitive evolutionary biases we carry, and yet they are becoming a problem or challenge for resilience. These positive illusions lead to overconfidence and to maintaining status quo, since change appears unnecessary. People tend, in other words, to overestimate their ability to avoid or cope with various challenges, also underestimating the likelihood of them ever being affected, especially in situations that are uncertain and ambiguous, where the threat is not imminent or previously experienced. So it is imminent, not imminent. Threat is not imminent. Okay, so let's just, I hope you know what I'm saying. IIMMANENT as opposed to IMMINENT. So immanent, existing or operating within. Okay, so the protection of libraries is immanent in constitutional arrangements. Of God permanently pervading and sustaining the universe, well, anyway. Immanent is sometimes confused with imminent, which is what I'm trying to avoid here. So where the threat is not immanent, so it's not the existing or operating within what we are used to, it's not inherent or previously experienced. So I just wanted to make sure, because I wanted to be sure that I'm saying immanent, not imminent. Anyway, with that I'll leave it here and go have lunch. Okay.